Hello and welcome to the garden. A slight setback today. I've got these winter squash plants here and I was going to put these winter squash in today, and in fact I was going to put these in a couple of days ago, but I didn't get around to it. And these are pretty big plants already for this pot size, so not great gardening, not great timing. I think very often I will have started the winter squash earlier in the season, and by now they'd be in big old pots, at least this size and sometimes bigger. I mean, the larger squash, this is a Marina di Chioggia, the larger squash might be in bigger pots than this, and they'll be big old plants before I set them out. This year I started them a little bit later because when you get them out a bit early and the weather's a bit miserable, if the temperatures are a bit borderline, they don't thrive. And I've had it where I've had two sowings in a season, and it's the latter sowing that has often done best. So I thought I'd leave it a little bit later, but I got to the point where I was looking at these thinking either I need to pot them on or plant them out. I decided to plant them out, and that got delayed a few days, and here I am right now. I was going to put them in the garden, that was the plan this morning. Then I checked the weather forecast, and bizarrely we've got a few cold nights coming up, and potentially as low as 5 degrees tonight. And okay, so there might not be a frost, but it's still a little bit on the low side, and it's going to be pretty low for several days now. And this would not be a sensible time to put them out. These have been outdoors for a couple of days. They're not in perfect condition. I think one of these leaves at least is slightly damaged where the plants got a little bit dry when they were in the greenhouse. We've moved them outdoors. They don't need the really hot temperatures that the greenhouse has, but then it got a little bit dry, and anyway, this is not great. So I was going to pop them in the ground today, and now I'm going to have to pot them on. I'm just having a look at the root system. Well, it's not too bad. You can see the start of some of the larger roots there, and there's quite a lot of fine root, but I don't think these are too bad. It would have been better if I was going to pot them on. It would have been better to do it a week or 2 weeks ago, but I am where I am, and I don't want to get these in the ground today. That would mean waiting for at least 4 days, and the longer I push it, the worse they're going to get. So I've decided at the end of all this waffle, I'm just going to pot them on, and I will then leave them in these pots for probably now a week and a half. I at least want to see some roots spread out through this pot. It might be as much as 2 weeks or so, and then I'll pop them out, and we'll be well into June then, and hopefully the temperatures will be rather better. But yeah, that's slightly disappointing, but these things do happen. Right, enough waffle. Time to pot on. In the barrow here I've got some old potting soil. It's a little bit dry. I've got some fish blood and bone, and then some of this horrible fluffy compost, but that should make a mixture that the squash will be happy with, I think, at least for a couple of weeks. So I'll just give that a good mix. Right, that will do. So let's see, get the depth right. Now on the stems here you can see the little positions where new roots can form, and you might occasionally see roots coming out and down into the soil. That's fine, and actually if you plant this deeper, these will root from the stem. And in fact, later on in the year, you can peg these down and potentially at any node they will root down into the soil. The thing with this is I do not ever plant these deeper. Even though they can form those roots, they are all of the cucurbits rather prone to rots around the stem. So if anything, I tend to set these up when I plant them, and I never set them deeper in the pot. So I'm not going to do anything with the depth there. I'm just going to drop that in and just fill around. Now these seed leaves can go. They're not doing anything useful right now. I'll just pack this fluffy stuff in, but being careful not to have any deeper soil around that stem. So yeah, that's all I need to do. So this Marina di Chioggia is a fantastic squash. This is the largest one I'm growing this year. It's not too huge, so it doesn't present too big a problem in the kitchen. You can see the roots are just starting to circle there, so I'll just tease those out. It's not far, very easy to just tease those roots out and encourage them to get out into this new soil. Always worth just taking a moment, not breaking the roots, not getting in there and wrenching it, but just very gently untangling them, unwinding them, and then that's going to root better into that pot. It's named for a little place just south of Venice, and same place the stripy red and white beetroot comes from. There's an interesting collection of different varieties from that region actually. This is a really old variety. Well, relatively speaking, obviously, none of the winter squash are so old, of course, because they come from the Americas. So that dates their earliest arrival into Europe. But amongst those, this is a particularly old variety. The fruit's probably about yay big, flattened, classic sort of pumpkin shape, maybe not ribbed really, but covered in knobbly skin. It's a really tough old skin, but when you get inside, the orange flesh is dense and rich. It's not at all watery, very well flavored. I think not just one of the oldest, but potentially one of the best. Certainly my favorite of the larger fruited squash. Some of them tend to be a little bit watery, and I don't like that at all. That's the Chioggia squash done, and I've got 4 of those. That's more than I really need. I will probably get 1, possibly 2 in the kitchen garden, and then we have a second place where we grow squash, and that's outside the kitchen garden, where we have what we call our dirty compost heap. So when we're cutting some of the rough grass, which tends to be seedy and weedy, or then when we're pulling out nasty perennial weeds, or generally stuff that we don't want to put on the compost heap here in the kitchen garden, it goes on the dirty heap. And actually last year we tried growing squash on that, and they did really well. So we'll be doing that again this year. I pot them into bottomless pots, so they get some nice compost in the top, and then they can root down into the compost heap, and they do, and they quite like that, and that makes some good use of that old compost there. So for now though, these are going to go in the greenhouse. I'll give these a drop of water in a minute. With the sweet dumpling and the butternut squash, I have 2 batches of plants. The others were taking their time to germinate. They did all come through pretty well actually in the end, but I started to get a little bit worried about them. I sowed them the same time as melons, and all the melons were up, and the Chioggia squash, they were all up, but the butternut and the sweet dumpling were taking their time. And these two are from the second batch. I probably don't need them, but I potted them on anyway. These don't need moving on right now, so I can leave those alone. Some of the others though, again, pretty big plants, so they do need to be moved on. Actually, that, I don't like the root on that at all. I'm not going to pot this one on. I'm going to tap this out and show you what the problem is, because I think I've had some kind of decay around that root. So I'm just going to pick that out. I have, yeah, that stem is not good at all. So this stem here is, that's not decay, something's eaten that. Something has had a really good chew around this stem. As soon as I picked it up, it was wobbling around, and yeah, I mean this might survive possibly, but well, not now. I've ripped its root ball off, but this would never be a good plant. Something's had a really good chew around there. That's a great pity, because that was starting to develop rather nicely, but I'll chuck that away in case the pest is still in there. I don't know what's done that. Could have been a slug maybe. I hope the others aren't like it. Let's have a look. No, I don't know. This one I think is a bit better. It's not very happy in that soil, but I hope these are all right, because this is a really great little squash. They're quite small, that sort of diameter, well, maybe good fist size, and depending what you're eating them with, cut in half and roasted, they're good for one or for two. Very tasty, sort of a dense, nutty flesh. And they produce plenty of them, they keep quite well. It's closely related to the delicata squash that I grew last year. Different shape. This one, I think, came quite a lot later. It's a more modern squash from Japan, if I remember rightly. But in any event, it is a really nice one. Now this one's got a much better root on it. And yeah, there's a little bit of root down the bottom to tease out. Not a lot though. This one is borderline. It probably doesn't really need potting on, but there is some root down the bottom, and within a week that will have wound its way around, so I will pot this one on as well. On to the final plants, and these are the butternut squash. Those are not too bad. These are a little bit smaller. Still worth moving on, I think. Get rid of those seed leaves. Yeah, there's a little bit of root down the bottom again. I know there are a lot of hybrid butternut squash. I don't grow those. This is the old Waltham butternut. I say old, it's not that old, but it's a pretty good performer anyway. It's a nice squash, that. I did have a couple of ridiculously prolific butternut squash one year, and I think that was a year we didn't sow quite as much of our own stuff, and we picked up a couple of plants from the garden centre. Of course, they were hybrids, and I've never seen so much fruit on a plant. 2 plants filled half the garden and just dozens and dozens of fruit. But they weren't very good. They were quite tasteless, a little bit on the wet side. They weren't great at all. I was very disappointed with them, but immensely prolific, but I didn't like the fruit. This one, at least, I know produces very tasty squash. So, and it produces plenty of them. I don't need the quantity of squash that perhaps some of the more prolific sorts can give you. And again, I've got plenty of plants. I've got a couple of small ones which I'm not going to pot on today, but I've got more than enough of these large ones for both in the garden here and on the dirty compost heap. So I certainly don't need more fruit than I get off of these. I'll probably only put 1 or 2 of these in the garden here. That is the last one I'm potting on today, and it'll be at least a week before I think about moving these out, and it could be, they'd probably be happy in here for a fortnight now. So I've given myself a little bit of breathing room, and hopefully the weather will warm up. It's always worth keeping an eye on the weather, and depends what time of year it is. Sometimes I like to wait for a little patch of warmer weather before I plant something out. On the other hand, there are some things I like to plant out when the weather's a little bit cooler, because lots of plants can suffer if you dump them in the ground when it's baking hot, and they get a bit upset for a few days before they get their roots down, and then you have to really keep on top of the watering when it's hot and dry. But in that respect, right now would be a good time to put them out, but nighttime temperatures a bit too chilly, and it's really worth keeping these plants happy. I don't know how the summer squash are going to react to that. Maybe they'll get a little bit upset, but I hope not. I've got most of the plants here up against the wall. That's quite a warm spot, so it's not too bad. But anyway, that is it for this video. Was going to be planting out, instead it was potting on. But thanks ever so much for watching, and bye for now.